Hello, it's good to see you again after a week break. I appreciate the opportunity to go down and see my brother. And now I'm glad to be back here and be able to study the book of Proverbs with you once again. We're going to be in Proverbs 25. And like most chapters in the book of Proverbs, we're going to look at a variety of topics. And the real challenge of Proverbs, of course, is how do I apply it to me? How does this make a difference in my life? How can I live life wiser? How can I use wisdom in my daily life? Because Solomon's really trying to teach us how to live successfully, how to have a successful life. And so let's look at chapter 25. We're going to begin in verse 1. It says, "These also are proverbs of Solomon, which the men of Hezekiah, king of Judah, transcribed." So we're going to start a new section here in chapter 25. These are going to be the proverbs that King Hezekiah's men transcribed for them. And we'll follow this from chapter 25 through chapter 29. Now, King Hezekiah was one of the good kings. He was a godly king. And he apparently appointed a committee to write down some of the Proverbs of Solomon. Now, Solomon wrote 3,000 Proverbs, it says in 1 Kings. 3,000 Proverbs. And so now these men have researched those Proverbs and they have transcribed them out for us. And in this chapter, we also have some broader sections, a number of verses that go together. And in my scripture, in my text, the New American Standard Version, it puts verses 1 through 7 together. So let's read those together. Verse 2. "It is the glory of God to conceal a matter, but the glory of kings is to search out a matter. As the heavens for height and the earth for depth, so the heart of kings is unsearchable. Take away the dross from the silver, and there comes out a vessel for the smith. Take away the wicked before the king, and his throne will be established in righteousness. Do not claim honor in the presence of the king, and do not stand in the place of great men. For it's better that it be said to you, 'Come up here,' than for you to be placed lower in the presence of the prince, whom your eyes have seen." So let's go back up to verse 2. It's the glory of God to conceal a matter, but the glory of kings to search out a matter. You see, God doesn't have to search out anything. God knows everything. And so God has the opposite situation for him. It's not to find out things, it's to reveal things. And God doesn't reveal everything he knows. In fact, in Deuteronomy 29:29 are words that we should all commit to memory. Here it says, "The secret things belong to the Lord our God, but the things revealed belong to us and our sons forever, that we may observe all the laws, all the words of this law." And so the secret things belong to God. He doesn't have to search anything. He knows everything. And for God, his job is to reveal for us certain truths. Now the king, he's like all men. He doesn't know everything, so he has to search things out. He has to investigate. And it's the glory of kings to search out a matter, to investigate things. As the heavens for height and the earth for depth, so the heart of kings is unsearchable. Here he just talks about, you don't know what's inside of a king or what he has to deal with. That's one of the things about our leaders that amaze me. I don't think everybody understands just how much they have to deal with. I mean, they have to know what's going on in every area of their kingdom, and they have to have so much insight and so much knowledge, and they have to have so many counselors giving them updates constantly about what's going on. And as far as the heavens for height and the earth for depth, so the heart of kings is unsearchable. We just don't understand what they're all dealing with. Verse 4, "Take away the dross from the silver, and there comes out a vessel for the smith. Take away the wicked before the king, and his throne will be established in righteousness." Silver is not going to be pure silver until it's refined. It's purified. And a nation is not going to be a blessed nation until it is purified, until it does away with the wicked, especially those who are wicked counselors, advisors to the king. It says, take away the wicked before the king, and his throne will be established in righteousness. Get away from the wicked. Take away from the wicked who want to tell us what the king should do and how he's not doing it the right way and all these different things. And we'll have a righteous country, he says. Do not claim honor in the presence of the king. Do not stand in the place of great men. For it's better that it be said to you, come up here, than for you to be placed lower in the presence of the prince whom your eyes have seen. Here he's trying to talk to us about the dangers of arrogance and the need for humility. And so when you go into the presence of the king, don't seek out the best seats, because if somebody more important than you shows up, he says, well, wait, you'll have to change seats. You'll have to go somewhere back here because we have someone more important. In fact, Jesus used this same principle to tell a parable in Luke the 14th chapter. It's amazing how much of Proverbs was repeated by Jesus. In Proverbs, the 14th chapter, in verse 7, it says, he began speaking a parable to the invited guests when he noticed how they had been picking out the places of honor at the table, saying to them, when you're invited by someone to a wedding feast, do not take the place of honor, for someone more distinguished than you may have been invited by him. And he who invited you both will come and say to you, give your place to this man, and then in disgrace you proceed to occupy the last place. But when you are invited, go and recline at the last place, so that when the one who has invited you comes, he may say to you, friend, move up higher. Then you will have honor in the sight of all who are at the table with you. For everyone who exalts himself will be humbled, and he who humbles himself will be exalted. That is basically what Solomon is saying here too. There's going to be some important people before the king, more important than you. Don't set yourself in front of them. Wait and allow the king to move you up closer to him if he desires to do that. So these passages seem to be talking about searching and exalting. And that particularly seems to be the theme there. We're going to change themes now in verses 8 through 10. He says, do not go out hastily to argue your case. Otherwise, what will you do in the end? When your neighbor humiliates you, argue your case with your neighbor. And do not reveal the secret of another, or he who hears it will reproach you, and the evil report about you will not pass away. Verses 8 through 10 here talk about neighborly conduct and the dangers of hasty litigation. Don't go out hastily to argue your case. Now here, once again, Jesus talked about something very much like this in the Sermon on the Mount in Matthew chapter 5. In verse 25, he says, make friends quickly with your opponent at law, while you are with him on the way, so that your opponent may not hand you over to the judge, and the judge to the officer, and you be thrown into prison. Truly I say to you, you will not come out of there until you have paid up the last cent. So be careful. Don't go to court too soon. In fact, he gives you a better way to do this. Argue your case with your neighbor. You don't have to go to court before you talk to your neighbor. Talk to your neighbor first. And once again, Jesus says pretty much the same thing in Matthew the 15th chapter. In Matthew 15, or rather Matthew the 18th chapter, verse 15, he says, if your brother sins, go and show him his fault in private. If he listens to you, you have won your brother. Go to him first. Before you go and do anything else, go to him first. And that's what Solomon is saying. Go to your neighbor. Argue your case with your neighbor, and don't reveal a secret to somebody else. Don't bring a third party in. Now, I've heard this. Don't bring in the gossip. Don't bring in the slander. Don't bring all these other things in. He's saying here, don't go to court hastily. Think about what you're doing, and first of all and foremost, go to your neighbor and talk to him. He might not even realize he's offended you. And so, and don't bring in a third party. Not yet. First talk to your neighbor, and don't reveal the secret of another. Because if you do, you're going to end up with a bad reputation yourself. Now, verses 11 through 28 are actually one giant section in the New American Standard Version. I'm going to break it up a little bit. I'm going to read, first of all, verses 11 through 13. Like apples of gold in settings of silver is a word spoken in right circumstances. Like an earring of gold and an ornament of fine gold is a wise reprover to a listening ear. Like the cold of snow in the time of harvest is a faithful messenger to those who sent him, for he refreshes the soul of his master. Once again, we're talking about the tongue. This is one of Solomon's favorite topics. But he says there's something very beautiful about saying the right thing at the right time. It is like apples of gold in settings of silver. He's thinking about this fine, precious ornament, this sculptured piece of ornament of gold and silver. He says that's what it's like to have a word spoken at the right time. The right word at the right time, in the right place, to the right person, in the right way, for the right reason, is so beautiful. Solomon is most like the most beautiful piece of jewelry. And to go with this, he says, like an earring of gold and an ornament of fine gold is a wise reprover to a listening ear. It takes somebody to listen. So someone who hears this good word and listens to it, he's also looks like fine jewelry, like this gold earring, an ornament of fine gold, something very beautiful. It's very beautiful when you're careful with what you say and you are open to hear things that are important for you to hear. Then, like the cold of snow in the time of harvest, is a faithful messenger to those who sent him, for he refreshes the soul of his master. Like the cold of snow in the time of harvest. Now, usually the time of harvest, and that's the end of summer. That's hot, and like the cold of winter. When I was a teenager, I helped bring in hay. Maybe you've done buck some hay, in your time, in your youth. And man, I remember just how hot it was and how sweaty it was and how dirty you were. And after you worked all day bringing in all that hay and putting it up in the barn, man, I remember running down to the river and jumping in the river with all my clothes on. This ice cold river, because it was so refreshing. And he's talking about this kind of refreshment. It's just like the snow in the time of harvest, something that really cool you down. He says, that's what it's like to get good news from this messenger. There is nothing more refreshing than getting this good news. So you have the importance of receiving good news here. This idea of the cold, the snow. It's interesting, too, that in the time of Solomon, they would bring snow down out of the mountains to put in their drinks, to cool them off. We put ice in our drinks. They had snow. They'd bring that ice and snow from the mountains to cool their drinks, too. That's the same thing, man, nothing better than a cold drink. And this messenger who brings good news, he's a faithful messenger. He refreshes the soul of his masters. Verse 14, like clouds and wind without rain is a man who boasts of his gifts falsely. Like clouds and winds without rain. He is a braggart, a big talker. He talks about all that he gives. And once again, it reminds me of something Jesus says in Matthew, the 6th chapter, in the Sermon on the Mount. And here's what Jesus says in chapter 6, verse 2. So when you give to the poor, do not sound a trumpet before you, as the hypocrites do in the synagogues and in the streets, so that they may be honored by men. Truly, I say to you, they have their reward in full. The thing here, though, in Solomon's case is the guy's bragging about a gift he never gives. He's like clouds and wind without rain is a man who boasts of his gifts falsely. This idea of clouds without rain is a metaphor used often in Scripture. In Jude, book of Jude, verse 12, Jude writes, these are the men who are hidden reefs in your love feast, when they feast with you without fear, carrying for themselves clouds without water, carried along by winds, autumn trees without fruit, doubly dead, uprooted. He talks about men who look like they should have something to offer, but they're empty. And here is this loudmouth, this braggart, this big talker who brags about the gift, but he doesn't give it. I guess the thing is, we have the statement, don't make promises you can't keep. That's this guy here. In verse 15, by forbearance a ruler may be persuaded, and a soft tongue breaks the bone. By forbearance, by patience, you can persuade a ruler, and with a soft tongue you can break a bone. You can, with patience and by a soft tongue, or in other words, by gentle words. Patience and gentle words can help persuade a ruler. It's amazing that he talks about a soft tongue can break a bone. There are no bones in our tongue, but it can break bones, is what he's saying. If you have the right words, you can do the seemingly impossible. The power of the tongue here is once again being talked about. The forbearance, the patience, and the gentle answer can cause great things to happen. Verse 16, have you found honey? Eat only what you need, that you not have it in excess and vomit it. Let your foot rarely be in your neighbor's house, or he will become weary of you and hate you. Here he's talking, just too much of a good thing is going to be problems. You overeat honey and you're going to end up vomiting, he says. And also, don't be in your neighbor's house too often, or else they're going to start resenting you. Don't overstay your welcome, we say. People need privacy. Everyone needs their privacy, and familiarity will breed contempt. Verse 18, like a club and a sword and a sharp arrow is a man who bears false witness against his neighbor. Verses 18 through 20 is really talking about the scourge of the tongue. So, verse 18, like a club and a sword and a sharp arrow is a man who bears false witness against his neighbor. Like a bad tooth and an unsteady foot is confidence in a faithless man in time of trouble. Like one who takes off a garment on a cold day, or vinegar on soda, is he who sings songs to a troubled heart. Here are people who don't know how to use the word. The word can be a powerful weapon. James calls it a fire. And lying about your neighbor can kill them as much as a club, a sword, or a sharp arrow. You can pierce people through with your words. Be careful of what you say. And then like a bad tooth, an unsteady foot, you can't rely on a bad tooth. You can't bite down on it. It will break. You can't walk on an unsteady foot. It's the confidence in a faithless man in a time of trouble. This guy, he can't be depended on. When things get rough, he gets going and you can't depend on him. He's absolutely useless. In fact, if you have a bad tooth, it could be extremely painful. And then verse 20, like one who takes off a garment on a cold day or vinegar on soda. Now, it seems to me that's how we used to make volcanoes. You have something that will erupt. Or he who sings a song to a troubled heart. There's a time to weep and a time to rejoice. Romans 12, rejoice with them that rejoice and weep with those who weep. You get that backwards and you're in trouble. Weep with those who rejoice, or rejoice with those who weep, and you're going to have a mess in your hand. And he says that's what's happened here. Like when he takes off a garment on a cold day, he just doesn't have much sense. Or like vinegar on soda, a little bit explosive as well, is he who sings songs to a troubled heart. Be careful of what you say to people who are in grief. Verse 21, if your enemy is hungry, give him food to eat, and if he's thirsty, give him water to drink, for you will heap burning coals on his head, and the Lord will reward you. Again, we're having this section here. In fact, the following section down to the end is about certain consequences that are going to happen. Think about these consequences, and let's, as we read these passages, and here's this passage in 21 through 23, how to treat our enemies. And there's an opportunity here to do good. Back in chapter 24, verses 17 and following, he says, do not rejoice when your enemy falls, and do not let your heart be glad when he stumbles, or the Lord will see it, be displeased, and turn his anger away from him. And then in verse 29, he says, do not say, thus I shall do to him as he has done to me. I will render to the man according to his work. Don't return evil for evil. And here he's just saying, if your enemy's hungry, give him food to eat. If he's thirsty, give him water. And isn't that sound like something that Jesus would have said and did say? I mean, and then he says, for if you do this, you'll heap burning coals on his head. Now, this is a metaphor. You'll cause him to feel remorse. You'll cause him to feel regret over what he has done. Now, Paul is going to take this concept and tell us Christians to have this concept in our life. In Romans, the 12th chapter, verses 19 through 21, he says, never take your own revenge, beloved, but leave room for the wrath of God. For it is written, vengeance is mine, I'll repay, says the Lord. But if your enemy is hungry, feed him, and if he's thirsty, give him a drink. For in so doing you will heap burning coals on his head. Do not be overcome by evil, but overcome evil with good. It's important that we try to do good things for those, even when they're causing us trouble. I had a teacher who was doing some marriage counseling, and the woman, she's having trouble with her husband, and he just said, well, have you tried putting burning coals on his lap? And she says, no, I tried hot coffee and that didn't work. Obviously not what he's talking about here. But he's just talking about, hey, you do good to this person, they're going to have regret and remorse that they didn't treat you better. Now, let's go verses 23 through 28, and notice the certain consequences that happen. The north wind brings forth rain, and a backbiting tongue, an angry countenance. It's better to live on a corner of the roof than in a house shared with a contentious woman. Like cold water to a weary soul, so is good news from a distant land. Like a trampled spring and a polluted well is a righteous man who gives away before the wicked. It is not good to eat much honey, nor is it glory to search out one's own glory. Like a city that is broken into and without walls is a man who has no control over his spirit. Certain consequences here. The north wind brings forth rain, a backbiting tongue, an angry countenance. If you don't watch what you say, you're going to cause people to be angry with you. It's better to live on a corner of a roof than in a house shared with a contentious woman. Now, he said exactly the same thing in chapter 21, verse 9, word for word. It's the same. So this gets a replay here. And in fact, women are praised often in the book of Proverbs. A virtuous woman is going to be praised in chapter 31, verse 10, a very famous part. But if a woman is contentious and angry, they're not going to be praised at all. Of course, there's the opposite side of this too, and that's how men treat their wives. He doesn't bring that out very much, but someone said if men treated their wives like thoroughbreds, they wouldn't act like nags. Well, treat your wife better, maybe. Like cold water to a weary soul, so is good news from a distant land. The result of good news is it's refreshing. And like a trampled spring in a polluted well is a righteous man who gives way before the wicked. Water everywhere, but not a drop to drink. There's a trampled spring and polluted well. It's a real disappointment. Here is the lost potential of this spring or of this well, and sometimes we see this with people. They had so much potential. You see this in preachers oftentimes. They had so much potential, but they turned it around and were a great disappointment. It's not good to eat much honey. He's mentioned that before. Nor is it glory to search out one's own glory. Both can cause you problems. And he goes back and we pointed this out in verse 16. And then like a city that's broken into and without walls is a man who has no control over his spirit. Self-discipline is so important, to have control over ourselves. The lack of self-control is going to leave you unprotected. It's going to leave you vulnerable. And that's what he's saying here. A city without walls is defenseless, and it's easily broken into. And he says the same thing with somebody who's undisciplined. So we have to be disciplined. We need to learn self-control when it comes to our temper, when it comes to our words, when it comes to our appetite, when it comes to our impatience, when it comes to our desire for revenge. Keep control of your spirit. So there's a chapter with a variety of topics. The need to search things out, to be thorough, to respect the king. The need to watch what we say once again is brought out here. How to treat our neighbors. A lot of things to think about. A lot of things to consider. I hope you've been blessed by the study. I'll see you again on Thursday. We'll look at chapter 26. May God bless you.